I still remember the way the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement that evening, as if the whole city had decided to dress up for someone more important than me. I adjusted the sleeve of my dark green coat and stepped out of the cab, the cold air brushing against my face like a quiet warning. The driver barely waited before pulling away. I watched the red taillights disappear, wondering, not for the first time, if I should have stayed home. But I couldn't. It was my son's birthday. Daniel had always loved grand celebrations. Even as a child, he wanted balloons bigger than his head and cakes that could feed half the neighborhood. And now, at 40, not much had changed, except the scale and the people he surrounded himself with. The restaurant stood in front of me, all glass and gold and quiet exclusivity. The kind of place where people didn't look at price tags and waiters didn't smile unless you mattered. I took a breath and walked inside. The hostess glanced at me, her eyes flickering just long enough to measure me. My coat, my shoes, my age. Yes? She asked politely, but not warmly. I'm here for the Whitmore dinner, I said. Catherine Whitmore. I'm Daniel's mother. That last part always felt necessary, as if I had to justify my presence in his world. Her expression changed slightly. Not kinder. Just adjusted. Of course. Right this way. As I followed her, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. Silver strands in my hair, carefully brushed. A simple dress, elegant, but not expensive. I had spent nearly 2 hours getting ready. Not for them. For him. The private room buzzed with laughter when I entered. Glasses clinked. Voices overlapped. Confidence filled the air like perfume. And there he was. Daniel. Tall, sharp, perfectly tailored. He looked like a man who belonged exactly where he stood. People leaned toward him when he spoke. They laughed a little louder at his jokes. For a moment, my heart swelled with pride. I had raised him, alone. After his father died, it had been just the two of us against the world. I worked late, skipped vacations, sold jewelry I once loved. Everything so he could have opportunities one never did. And now here he was. Successful. Admired. Untouchable. He noticed me a second later. That smile, the one he used for clients, flickered across his face before settling into something more restrained. Mom, he said, stepping forward and giving me a quick hug. It felt practiced. Careful. You made it. I wouldn't miss it, I replied softly. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I handed him a small box. Inside was a fountain pen. Antique. It had belonged to his father. I had kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment. He didn't open it. Thanks, he said, slipping it into his jacket pocket like it was a receipt. Come, he added. I'll introduce you. And just like that, I became part of the background. Names blurred together. Smiles came and went. Conversations floated around me, but never included me. Investment strategies. Private schools. Summer homes in places I had only seen in magazines. No one asked about me. No one cared that I had once been a school principal, that I had shaped hundreds of young lives, that I had raised the man standing proudly at the center of the room. To them, I was just an extra detail. At some point, I found myself sitting at a table near the back. Not with Daniel. Of course not. I folded my hands in my lap and listened to strangers talk about things that felt very far away from my life. That's when I noticed the photographer. He moved smoothly through the room, capturing laughter, glasses raised, perfect moments. He took several photos of Daniel and his wife, Vanessa. She looked stunning. She always did. Elegant, controlled, flawless in a way that felt almost untouchable. She hadn't hugged me when I arrived. Just nodded. Catherine. Like I was someone she had met once at a conference. The photographer approached our table. I straightened slightly, unsure what to do with my hands. And then, a light touch on my shoulder. Catherine, Vanessa said gently. Too gently. I looked up at her. Would you mind stepping aside when the photographer takes pictures? She asked. I blinked. I'm sorry. Her smile didn't change. Daniel may use these photos for professional purposes. Some of his partners will see them. We just want everything to look cohesive. Cohesive. I repeated the word in my mind, trying to understand it. You mean you don't want me in the photos? She tilted her head slightly. I think it would be best. For a second, I thought she might realize what she was saying. She didn't. Daniel appeared beside her. Mom, he said quietly, it's just for work. Don't make this awkward. Awkward. The room felt smaller suddenly. Louder. Or maybe quieter. I couldn't tell. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. At the man I had built my life around. And something inside me shifted. Of course, I said. My voice surprised even me. Calm. Steady. I understand. Vanessa smiled, satisfied. Daniel nodded, relieved. And just like that, it was settled. I stood up slowly. I need to make a call, I added. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was all right. The hallway outside the room felt cooler, quieter. I walked into the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and leaned against the door. For a moment, I let the silence press against me. Not tears. Not yet. Just clarity. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The number was saved. Of course it was. I had used that card for years. For Daniel. For his emergencies. His opportunities. His life. Customer service, a voice answered. Yes, I said. I'd like to cancel my card. There was a pause. May I ask why? I looked at my reflection in the small mirror across from me. A woman I barely recognized stared back. Because, I said quietly, it's no longer needed. The representative continued speaking, asking questions, confirming details. I answered everything calmly. At one point, she mentioned the pending charge from the restaurant. A large one. I closed my eyes for a second. Then I said, yes. Decline it. When the call ended, I stood there for a moment longer. Then I opened my purse again. Inside was an envelope. I had planned to give it to Daniel later that evening. A surprise. Something meaningful. Now, it felt unnecessary. I walked out, not toward the dining room, but toward the exit. No one noticed me leaving. Outside, the night air felt different. Sharper. Cleaner. I pulled my coat tighter around me and stepped onto the sidewalk. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what Daniel needed. I wasn't wondering how to fix something for him. I wasn't waiting to be included. I simply stood there, alone, and strangely, free. The taxi ride back to my hotel felt longer than it should have been, as if the city itself was stretching time, forcing me to sit with everything that had just happened. I didn't look at my phone at first. I didn't want to see his name flashing across the screen. Didn't want to hear the urgency in his voice, the kind that only appeared when something had gone wrong in his perfectly constructed world. Instead, I watched the streets blur past the window, people laughing outside bars, couples walking arm in arm, strangers living their lives without knowing that mine had just quietly split into before and after. When I finally reached my room, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The silence was heavy, but not suffocating. Not like before. I slipped off my shoes, placed my purse carefully on the small desk, and sat on the edge of the bed. That's when my phone started vibrating. Once. Twice. Then again and again, relentless, like a knocking I couldn't ignore forever. I picked it up. Daniel. Of course. I let it ring. Then a message appeared. Mom, what's going on? Another call. I declined it this time. Then Vanessa. I didn't answer her either. Another message. This isn't funny. I almost laughed at that. Funny. Yes, that's exactly what this was. I turned the phone face down and stood up, walking slowly to the window. Rain had started falling, soft at first, then steadier, turning the city lights into blurred streaks of gold and white. Somewhere across town, in that elegant restaurant, reality was unfolding without me. I could picture it clearly. The waiter approaching Daniel, his polite smile tight as he explained the card had been declined. The confusion. The whispers. The subtle shift in the room as confidence turned into discomfort. Daniel checking his phone. Calling me. Again. And again. Vanessa trying to maintain composure while calculating how to fix the situation. Their perfect evening cracking at the edges.
My phone buzzed again.
This time I picked it up, not to answer, but to read. Mom, answer your phone right now. Another message followed immediately. This is serious. I sat back down, holding the phone loosely in my hand. Serious. That word again. Everything was always serious when it affected him. I wondered, briefly, if he had ever considered what was serious to me. What it felt like to be asked to step out of a photograph. To be erased from a moment that was supposed to belong to family. I turned the phone off. Just like that, the noise disappeared. I changed into a simple nightgown and sat in the dim light of the bedside lamp. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fix anything. There was no plan forming in my mind, no next step to rescue him, no strategy to smooth things over. There was only stillness. It was unfamiliar, almost unsettling, but not unpleasant. Sleep came in fragments. I drifted in and out, memories slipping through my mind like old film reels. Daniel as a little boy, running toward me after school, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Daniel at 12, standing beside me at his father's funeral, his small hand gripping mine tightly. It's just us now, Mom, he had said. And I had promised him everything would be okay. I had believed it. I had built my entire life around that promise. Morning came slowly. Pale light filtered through the curtains, and for a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then it all returned, clear and sharp. I reached for my phone and turned it on. Notifications flooded the screen instantly. Missed calls, messages, voicemails. I didn't listen to them. I didn't need to. The text told me enough. You embarrass me. Do you have any idea what you've done?
Call me now.
And then, hours later, we need to talk. That last one was different.
Shorter.
Colder. I set the phone aside and ordered coffee. When it arrived, I sat by the window, wrapping my hands around the warm cup, letting the steam rise against my face. I expected to feel guilt, regret, panic. Instead, I felt clarity. Not happiness. Not yet. But something close to truth. Later that morning, I opened my laptop and reviewed my finances. Habit. Discipline. Numbers had always grounded me. My savings were modest but stable. Enough if I was careful. Enough to live quietly, comfortably. The realization settled over me like a soft blanket. I didn't need anyone. Not financially. Not practically. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider what that meant.
My phone buzzed again.
A new message. We're at your hotel.
Come down.
I stared at the screen for a long moment. Of course they had come. Daniel had always been persistent when he wanted something. I could ignore him, stay in my room, let the situation stretch until it broke. But I knew him too well. He wouldn't leave easily. Instead, I typed a response. Central Park, 2 p.m. The reply came instantly. We'll be there. Of course they would. I finished my coffee, dressed slowly, deliberately, choosing a simple outfit. Nothing flashy, nothing to prove. Just myself. As I stepped outside, the city felt different than it had the night before. Not intimidating. Not overwhelming. Just a place. A place where I could exist without explanation. The walk to the park gave me time to think, though my thoughts weren't as chaotic as I expected. There was no speech forming in my head, no rehearsed arguments. Just a quiet understanding that something had changed and that I couldn't go back. They were already there when I arrived. Daniel was pacing near the fountain, his movements sharp, impatient. Vanessa sat on a bench, her posture rigid, her expression carefully composed. They both looked up when they saw me. Relief flashed across Daniel's face, but it didn't last. Finally, he said, walking toward me. Do you have any idea what you've done? I met his gaze calmly. Hello, Daniel. Vanessa stood as well, her arms crossing lightly. Catherine, she said, her tone cool. We sat down, the three of us forming a small, tense circle in the middle of a peaceful afternoon. People passed by, unaware. Children laughed nearby. Life continued, indifferent to the storm unfolding between us. You humiliated me, Daniel began immediately. In front of clients.
My boss had to step in and pay.
Do you understand how that looks? I imagine it was uncomfortable, I replied. Uncomfortable, he repeated sharply. It was a disaster. I listened without interrupting as he went on about reputation, about perception, about consequences.
Not once did he ask why.
Not once did he consider what had led me to that moment. When he finally paused, I spoke. You asked me not to be in your photos. Silence. Vanessa shifted slightly. That's not the same thing, she said quickly. That was just about presentation. Presentation, I repeated. Daniel exhaled impatiently. Mom, you're overreacting. It was a small request. I looked at him then, really looked. No, I said quietly. It wasn't. Something flickered in his expression. Annoyance, maybe confusion. We didn't mean anything by it, he insisted. I know, I said. And that was the problem. After that conversation in the park, something invisible settled between us. Not anger, not even disappointment, but distance. A quiet, undeniable distance that neither of us seemed willing, or perhaps able, to cross. Daniel tried to say a few more things before I left, something about working it out and not making things worse, but his words felt empty, like lines from a script he didn't fully believe in. Vanessa didn't speak much after that, though the look she gave me as we parted said enough. Cold, measured, and faintly irritated, as if I had complicated something that should have remained simple. I walked away without turning back, my step steady, my chest lighter than it had been in years, though there was still an ache somewhere deep inside me, a quiet grief for something I was only just beginning to understand I had lost long ago. The next morning I left the city. No dramatic goodbyes, no messages, no attempts to reach out. I packed my things, checked out of the hotel, and took an early train north. As the city's skyline faded behind me, replaced by stretches of gray sky and bare trees, I felt something shift again, this time not sharp like the night at the restaurant, but gradual, like a door slowly closing. I wasn't running away. That was the strange part. For the first time, I wasn't escaping a problem or rushing toward someone else's need. I was simply going home. My house greeted me with silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of loneliness, but something softer, almost welcoming. The familiar creak of the wooden floor, the faint scent of old books and coffee, the way the light fell through the curtains in the afternoon, it all felt unchanged, yet I felt completely different standing in it. I set my bag down by the door and stood there for a moment, just breathing. No phone calls.
No urgency.
No one waiting for something from me. The first few days passed quietly. I returned to my routines, morning coffee on the porch, slow walks through the neighborhood, small tasks around the house that I had neglected for years. At first, I kept checking my phone, almost out of habit, expecting a message, a call,
Something.
but nothing came. Not from Daniel, not from Vanessa. The silence stretched, day after day, and with each passing hour, it became clearer. Without something to gain, I was no longer a priority. That realization should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it felt clarifying. On the fourth day, I found myself opening a closet I hadn't touched in years. Inside were boxes stacked neatly, each one labeled in my careful handwriting. Old photographs, documents, pieces of a life I had lived so quickly I never had time to revisit it. I pulled one box down and carried it to the living room, setting it on the coffee table. Dust rose as I opened it, catching in the sunlight. The first photo I picked up was of Daniel as a baby. I smiled despite myself. He had been such a quiet child in the beginning, always watching, always absorbing everything around him. I traced the edge of the photograph with my finger, remembering how small he had felt in my arms, how fiercely I had loved him from the very beginning. That kind of love doesn't disappear. It doesn't weaken. It simply changes shape. I kept going. Photos from his childhood, birthdays, school events, vacations we could barely afford but took anyway because I wanted him to have memories filled with joy, not absence. Then the later years, teenage expressions, distant smiles, a growing independence that I had mistaken for strength. I paused at a picture taken shortly after his father died. Daniel stood beside me, his face serious, older than it should have been for a boy his age. I remembered that day clearly, the way he had tried not to cry, the way I had promised him that I would take care of everything. And I had. But somewhere along the way, taking care had become something else. Something unbalanced. I found another photo, his college graduation. I remembered working extra shifts just to afford his tuition after he lost his scholarship. I had told myself it was temporary, that he would find his way, that he just needed support. Then came the first business failure. The loans. The wedding.
The house.
Each time, I had stepped in without hesitation, without question. Because that's what mothers do. That's what I believed. But looking at those photos now, I saw something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. A pattern. Every moment of crisis followed by my intervention. Every success built, at least in part, on my sacrifice. And somewhere in all of that, something essential had been lost, not just for me, but for him too. I closed the box slowly. Was I helping him? I whispered to the empty room. Or was I teaching him that someone would always fix everything? The question lingered longer than I expected. That evening, my phone rang. For a brief second, my heart jumped. I thought it might be Daniel. But the name on the screen was Susan, a friend from my book club. I hesitated before answering. Not because I didn't want to talk, but because I realized how little I had allowed myself to connect with people who weren't part of Daniel's life. "Catherine," she said warmly when I picked up. "I was just thinking about you. A few of us are getting together tonight. Nothing fancy, just dinner. Would you like to come?" My instinct was immediate. No, I stopped myself. Why not? There was no reason. No obligation holding me back. No one expecting me somewhere else. Just habit. "I'd love to," I said instead. Her surprise was clear, even through the phone. "Wonderful. 7 o'clock. That evening, I stood in my kitchen, unsure of what to wear. It felt almost absurd. After everything I had been through, something as simple as choosing an outfit for dinner felt unfamiliar. I finally settled on something comfortable and understated, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside. Susan's house was warm, filled with laughter and the smell of home-cooked food. The moment I walked in, I felt it, that sense of being welcomed, not evaluated. No one looked me over. No one measured my worth. They simply smiled. "Catherine, you made it," Susan said, pulling me into a brief, genuine hug. Dinner was simple. Conversation even simpler. Stories, jokes, shared experiences. No one spoke about wealth or status or appearances. They talked about books, about memories, about small things that somehow felt more meaningful than anything I had heard at Daniel's dinner. At one point, someone asked me about my interests. I opened my mouth to answer, and realized I didn't know. Not really. For years, my identity had been tied to roles. Mother, provider, support system. But beyond that, what was mine? "I used to enjoy photography," I said slowly, the words surprising even me. "A long time ago." "Used to?"
Susan asked.
"Why not now?" I hesitated. "Life," I said simply. She studied me for a moment. "Well," she said gently, "life's still happening." The words stayed with me long after I returned home that night. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't check my phone. Instead, I went straight to the closet again and pulled out another box, this one smaller, heavier. Inside, wrapped carefully in an old cloth, was my camera. I hadn't touched it in years. My fingers traced its edges as I lifted it, the weight both familiar and strange. It had been a gift from my husband, one of the last things he had given me before he passed. I remembered how excited I had been back then, taking classes, experimenting, capturing small moments just because they felt beautiful. When had I stopped? I raised the camera slowly, pointing it toward the window where the early evening light filtered through the glass. My hands adjusted instinctively, muscle memory returning after years of neglect.
Click.
The sound echoed softly in the quiet room, and in that moment, something inside me shifted again. Not because of Daniel, not because of the past, but because, for the first time in a very long time, I had done something just for myself. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had somewhere to be, but because my mind felt awake. There was a quiet energy in me, something unfamiliar yet steady, like a part of myself that had been asleep for years was slowly stretching back to life. The camera sat on the table where I had left it the night before, catching the soft morning light, and for a moment I just stood there looking at it, remembering who I used to be before everything in my life revolved around someone else's needs. I made coffee, carried it to the window, and watched the neighborhood come to life. A man walking his dog, a woman jogging past in steady rhythm, a delivery truck stopping 2 houses down. Ordinary things, small moments. And yet, for the first time in years, I noticed them not as background noise, but as something worth paying attention to. I set my cup down, picked up the camera, and without overthinking it, stepped outside. The air was crisp, fresh with the faint scent of rain from the night before. I walked slowly, not toward any destination, just moving, observing. The way light hit the pavement, the way shadows stretched between buildings, the way people existed in their own worlds, unaware of mine. I lifted the camera once, then again, adjusting, framing, capturing. Nothing extraordinary, just life. But somehow it felt important. By the time I returned home, nearly 2 hours had passed. I hadn't checked my phone once. That realization stopped me in the doorway. For years, my phone had been an extension of Daniel's life. Calls, messages, emergencies, requests. It had dictated my attention, my time, my priorities. And now it sat untouched on the kitchen counter. I didn't rush to it. Instead, I sat down and reviewed the photos I had taken. Most were imperfect, some blurred, others poorly framed. But a few made me pause. There was something in them. Not technical perfection, but feeling, presence. I smiled. Later that day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I signed up for a photography class. It felt almost reckless, spending money on something that wasn't necessary, something that didn't serve anyone but me. For a brief moment, guilt tried to creep in, that familiar voice reminding me of responsibilities, of priorities, of what I should be doing instead. But this time, I didn't listen. This was my life, too. The class started the following week. Walking into that studio, I felt out of place at first. Most of the students were younger, confident in a way I no longer recognized in myself. They spoke easily, laughed, compared equipment and experience. I almost turned around and left. But then I remembered the silence of my house, the emptiness I had lived with for so long. And I stayed. First time, a voice asked beside me. I turned to see a man about my age, maybe slightly younger, holding a camera that looked far more modern than mine. Yes, I said. Or, it used to be a long time ago. He smiled. That still counts. The class began, and as the instructor spoke about light, composition, perspective, I felt something click inside me again. Not because the information was new, but because it reminded me of a version of myself I had forgotten. A version that was curious, engaged,
Alive.
Weeks passed quickly. Tuesday evenings became something I looked forward to. I practiced during the day, experimenting, learning, failing, improving. I started visiting places I had never bothered to explore before. Parks, small streets, quiet corners of the town where life unfolded in subtle, beautiful ways. And slowly, without realizing it, my world began to expand. People began to notice. "You have a good eye," the instructor told me one evening, studying one of my photographs. "You capture emotion. That's not something you can teach easily." I didn't know how to respond at first. For so long, any recognition I received had been tied to what I provided, what I gave, what I supported, not to something that was purely mine. "Thank you," I said finally. And I meant it. Outside of class, my life began to change in small but meaningful ways. I spent more time with Susan and the others, no longer making excuses or declining invitations out of habit. I allowed myself to enjoy things, simple dinners, conversations, laughter that didn't feel forced or calculated. There was no pressure to be anything other than who I was. And yet, despite all of this, Daniel remained somewhere in the background of my thoughts. Not constantly, but enough. Sometimes I wondered if he would call, if he would realize something had shifted, if he would reach out not for money, not for help, but simply to talk. He didn't. Weeks turned into months. No messages. No calls. The silence became its own answer. One evening, after class, Susan walked with me to the parking lot. "You've changed," she said casually.
I glänzte her.
"Is that a good thing?" She smiled. "It is. You seem lighter." I thought about that. Lighter. "Yes," I said slowly. "I think I am." She nodded, then hesitated before adding, "Have you ever thought about showing your work? Maybe an exhibition?" I laughed softly. "I think that might be a bit much." "Why?" she asked. "Because you don't think you're good enough? Or because you're not used to doing something for yourself?" Her question stayed with me long after we said goodbye. That night, I sat at my computer, scrolling through the photographs I had taken over the past few months. There were hundreds of them, maybe more. Landscapes, portraits, small details that most people would overlook. But together, they told a story. My story. Without overthinking it, I selected a few of my favorites and sent them to be printed. It felt bold, unfamiliar, but right. A few days later, I received an email from a local community center announcing an upcoming exhibition for local artists. The timing felt almost too perfect. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my finger hovering over the keyboard. This was the kind of thing I would have dismissed before. Not practical, not necessary, not important. But now, I typed a message expressing my interest. And I sent it. Immediately, doubt followed. What if I wasn't good enough? What if no one cared? What if I was embarrassing myself? But beneath all of that, there was something stronger. A quiet certainty that this mattered. Not to anyone else.
To me.
A week later, I received a response. My work had been accepted. I read the email twice, just to be sure. Then I sat back, letting the realization settle in. For years, I had defined my worth through someone else's life, through what I could give, what I could fix, what I could support. And now, for the first time, something I had created, something that came entirely from me, was being seen, valued. I looked around my quiet home, at the life I had rebuilt piece by piece, and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time.
Pride.
Not loud, not overwhelming, just steady. My phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the moment. I glanced at the screen. Daniel. For a second, everything inside me stilled. Months of silence, and now this. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let it ring once.
Twice.
3 times. Then I picked it up. "Hello," I said. There was a pause on the other end. "Mom," he said. His voice sounded different. Not confident. Not controlled. Something else. "I need to talk to you." For a moment after I heard his voice, I didn't respond. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I realized I didn't feel the same urgency I once would have. There was no immediate rush of concern, No instinctive need to fix whatever problem he was about to place in front of me. Instead, there was a pause, a space I had never allowed myself before. And inside that space, I could finally choose how to respond, not as the version of myself shaped by years of sacrifice, but as the person I had slowly become. "I'm listening," I said calmly. There was another pause on his end, longer this time, as if he hadn't expected that tone from me. "Things haven't been great," Daniel admitted. His voice lacked the sharp edge it once carried. It sounded thinner, strained, like something had worn it down. "A lot has changed since we last spoke." I leaned back in my chair, my gaze drifting toward the photographs spread out on the table in front of me. My photographs. Pieces of a life I had started building for myself, quietly, steadily, without permission from anyone else. "What happened?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "I lost my position," he said. "A few months ago. The firm made cuts. I thought I'd recover quickly, but I didn't." He hesitated before continuing. "We had to sell the house." I absorbed that in silence. The house had been more than just a property. It had been a symbol of success, of status, of everything he had believed he needed to maintain. And now it was gone. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Not out of obligation, but because I understood what it meant to lose something you had built your identity around. "We're trying to figure things out," he went on. "We found a smaller place," but he trailed off. There it was. I didn't interrupt. I didn't fill the silence for him. "But we need help," he finished finally. "Just this once. To get back on our feet." I closed my eyes briefly, not out of frustration, but out of recognition. The pattern hadn't changed. The circumstances had. The tone had. But the expectation remained the same. "How much?" I asked quietly. 60,000, he said. The number hung in the air between us. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have hesitated. I would have already been calculating how to make it happen, what I could sell, what I could rearrange, how I could solve it before it became a real problem. But now, I felt something entirely different. Clarity. "I can't do that, Daniel," I said. Silence. Not the kind that invites conversation, but the kind that resists it. "What do you mean you can't?" he asked, his voice tightening slightly. "I mean exactly that," I replied. "I don't have that kind of money available to give." "That's not true," he said quickly. I've always made it work." I finished for him. "Yes, I have. But that doesn't mean I should keep doing it." Another pause. "You're my mother," he said, as if that alone should resolve everything. "I am," I agreed. "And because I need to be honest with you. I've spent years helping you financially, supporting you, stepping in when things fell apart. And I did that because I believed it was the right thing to do. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being help and became expectation." "That's not fair," he said, though there was less conviction in his voice than before. "It is fair," I said gently, "because I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because I finally understand something I didn't before." "And what's that?" he asked. "That love and support aren't supposed to come at the cost of losing yourself." The words settled between us. "I'm not abandoning you," I continued. "If you need advice, I'm here. If you need a place to stay while you figure things out, my home is open to you. But I'm not going to finance your life anymore." He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. "That's not enough." I looked down at my hands, at the faint lines that told the story of years I had spent giving more than I ever kept. "It has to be," I said. The call ended not long after that. Not with resolution, not with understanding, but with something closer to acceptance, even if he didn't fully realize it yet. I set the phone down slowly, expecting to feel something heavy settle over me. Guilt, regret, doubt. But none of those came. Instead, there was a quiet steadiness. Later that evening, I stood in front of my photographs at the exhibition, watching as people moved from one image to another, pausing, studying, feeling. Some asked questions. Others simply nodded, as if they understood something without needing words. I spoke with them easily, naturally, without the hesitation I once carried in unfamiliar spaces. "You have a remarkable way of capturing people," someone said to me. "Thank you," I replied. And this time, I didn't deflect the compliment. I accepted it. Susan found me a little while later, handing me a glass of wine. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her eyes searching mine with quiet concern. I considered the question. "I'm okay," I said. And I was. Not because everything was perfect, not because the situation with Daniel had been resolved, but because, for the first time, my sense of self didn't depend on that relationship. As the evening continued, I noticed something unexpected. People were interested in my work, genuinely interested. One couple asked about purchasing a photograph. Another person asked if I had considered doing a series. The gallery coordinator mentioned future opportunities. Each conversation felt like a small confirmation that I existed beyond what I had been for so long, that I had something of my own to offer, that I was more. When I returned home that night, the house felt different again. Not empty, not quiet in the old sense, but full of possibility, of presence, of something that belonged entirely to me. I placed my camera on the table, next to the framed photograph of Daniel as a child. He was laughing in that picture, running through water, completely unguarded, completely free. I touched the frame lightly, feeling that familiar mix of love and distance. "I still love you," I said softly. That hadn't changed. It probably never would, but something else had. I turned off the light and walked toward my bedroom, the faint sound of my own footsteps echoing gently through the house. Outside, the night was calm, the world moving forward in its quiet, steady way. And for the first time in a very long time,
So was I.